Opinions! Recently I found myself doing a deep dive through the archives of my old role-playing days, and it inspired me to share some more stories about our old friend Dave. And I realized that this may have been confusing since a lot of the stories I read have some problem named Dave, but this is my Dave. Dave, the shit role player. I don't know if I can say that in the first 30 seconds anymore. I might have to bleep it. We'll find out. But anyway, yes, there are many stories about Dave. I'm doing my best to summarize and present only the most interesting ones, because things got complicated, especially for a group that was mostly 6 people. There were others that Dave mostly invited, but they don't show up quite as often in these stories. I'm also trying my best because a lot of stories about Dave are not archived and would be going on just my memory, which isn't the best. That's why I have computers to remember and know everything for me. You're welcome, Internet. Anyway, I've rambled on long enough. You're not here to listen to me. Well, you are here to listen to me, but this isn't the voice I have for most of the video. You're here to listen to stories of Dave. And fair warning, these ones get nasty. Before I get into the meat of these stories about Dave and his awful RP skills, I want to present a theory to explain, but definitely not excuse, some of his behavior. Given the types of characters he played and the way they were played, it often felt like Dave wanted to RP a cartoon, where the rest of us wanted to RP a more serious story. I don't say this to disparage cartoons or animation. I simply mean it to compare and contrast actions and consequences. In a cartoon, Wile E. Coyote can fall off the cliff and get blown up twice, and he's getting up just fine. In a cartoon, Pete could commit casual acts of terrorism trying to one-up Mickey Mouse, and by the next episode he'd be back to another job with a clean criminal record. In a cartoon, impossible odds are defeated by the animator coming out and erasing them, and the story just goes on. In these cartoons, the impossible, improbable, and when pushed too far, insane can happen, with no real consequences. And that's what Dave likes. Loud, crazy, insane actions happening, often involving violence. See also, Alf getting attacked by a cat. End of sentence, end of thought. But when adult animation, in the sense of animated characters swear and do 18 and over actions, is introduced to someone who enjoys loud, violent actions as a substitute for humor, then things escalate to a degree that crosses multiple lines. Before anyone accuses me of being a pearl-clutching church lady going, "Think of the children!" and encouraging banning this media because someone saw it and got bad ideas, Dave was around 10 years older than me. But yes, this collection of Dave stories is, particularly bad. Content warning, sexual assault levels of bad. As before, names of everyone and every character, except for me, canon characters, and my original characters, have been changed to protect the innocent. Go check out the first Dave video for names. So the main conflict of the story was a war between 2 psychics, both from Robin, of various origins. Meg, a young woman who was experimented on, got powers to affect reality with her mind, and had just about everything that could go wrong in a backstory go wrong. And Haruda, a mind leech, which was essentially a creature of negative thought essence. It got complicated. This is years of story I'm condensing into a couple pages worth of text. Bear with me. In the middle of this war, Dave decides the most important subplot he could bring up, allegedly to advance the story, is a chili contest. It quickly became apparent this wasn't to advance the story at all, but at this point we were kind of used to that from Dave. And Dave decided his main set of protagonists for said chili would be Mordecai and Rigby from Regular Show, who were tasked with rebuilding the House of Gabriel, my main character, after it burned down for, I believe, the 10th time that month, as part of a running joke that requires another story entirely to explain. They instead turned it into a chili kitchen, because chili is more important than anything my characters were doing. And while brainstorming for how to make their chili, they decided to call it the Haruda en Fuego, which is about as tasteful in universe as calling a microwave dinner the Vladimir Putin special delivery. And I'm fairly sure darker than Regular Show gets, knowing Regular Show gets pretty dark. Now, Haruda basically gets pinged every time someone mentions her name or uses her image, another thing treated as a running gag by Dave. And she showed up to go, "What the hell?" But instead of destroying them and earning a round of Dave complaining, she agreed only if her second in command, Akemi, could be a judge. You'd think this would be the craziest thing to happen to said chili contest, but in the process of preparing for it, another of Robin's characters, Marie, a woman who's worked her whole life as a house servant, gets wind of the contest and is eager to join. Her best friend / heterosexual life partner, Werner, Neil's character, general chemist and formerly undead guy, pretty chill, agrees to help enhance it with some chemicals he had to spare. Unfortunately, due to not labeling said chemicals, Marie's chili ended up being dosed with meth. This caused some chaos during the actual contest as the judges got dosed. Not to be outdone, Dave had a shitload of canon characters also in the chili contest, including Red from Dick Figures. Red also proclaimed he had a secret ingredient in his chili to add bonus flavor. So while Dave, Robin, and I were role-playing the contest, and Veronica and Steve were in the background cackling, Dave, as Red, proudly proclaimed his secret ingredient was that he jacked off in the chili. Absolute silence flooded the group. Red once more proclaimed his actions, but was interrupted by the judges, who we wordlessly agreed were immediately sobered up from crystal meth by how out there Red's, and by extension Dave's, proclamation was. Veronica immediately got up and left the table for the rest of the night. Steve was dead quiet. We told Red he lost and to get the fuck out. And eventually he did, but not after a lot of yelling and "Look at me!" type antics. The mood of the chili contest went back to manic soon after, as once the winner was declared, Haruta took the opportunity to basically shove memories of Marie's tragic past into her head. This caused panic, people trying to figure out what to do, and a lot of Dave's characters spontaneously forming an angry mob and starting a riot over the chili contest being ruined. Because meth and a stick figure's fluids were fine, but this was too far, apparently. We're going to put a pin in that story. We'll get back to it, there are just other stories about Dave and his relationship with sexual assault to get to explain the table's reaction. So as you might have guessed with Red from Dick Figures and my previous story of Dave liked characters who were loud, obnoxious, and preferably committed violent crimes as their form of comedy. People hate these characters with a passion in the middle of more serious RP scenes, but Dave hated consequences, so they were there by the dozen. Many came and went through the years. For instance, George Liquor from Ren and Stimpy was at the chili contest, brutalizing something or other because he lost, but we ignored him so hard he went away. Which was the best case scenario for one of these characters. Often we got the worst way they could be handled. Case in point, when we were role-playing around the same time as the first season of Rick and Morty. Now, Dave wasn't very good at writing canon characters despite the hundreds he possessed. He could get their speech patterns, but not their thought patterns, so to speak. If he was given control of, say, Walter White, Walter would be a mustache-twirling supervillain. Or Spider-Man would be telling jokes that don't land and not really caring about other people. Or Papyrus from Undertale would be a hyper-intelligent trapmaker who has spaghetti superpowers. That was actually how he played Papyrus, the other two were hypotheticals. So we take that kind of playstyle and have that applied to Rick and Morty, a show which I don't think Dave watched all that much, except for the episode about annoying characters introduced mid-series, which of course he'd love at face value. So mostly he just spouted memes or generic stuff using Rick and Morty's voice pattern. Yes, he was that guy. The one imitating Rick and Morty because clearly no one else can. In the very earliest days, they plagued the internet. And in between screaming forced catchphrases, we got the many crimes of Rick Sanchez, including, but not limited to, interrupting plot points so Rick could recap what happened in the plot to Morty. When called out for interrupting, he went, "Ugh, fine," and continued doing it. Randomly assaulting villagers. And also Springtrap, who was reprogrammed because reprogramming the spooky robots was a plot Dave and Steve thought was cool. Trying to rebuild the Old Lady Strip Club. Succeeding, for no reason, at rebuilding the Old Lady Strip Club. Publicly jacking it in front of the Old Lady Strip Club. The Old Lady Strip Club stuff was Dave attempting to shove us to Rick, since if we wouldn't accept that his rambling about stuff was just as important as the plot, then we'd have to make him part of the new plot. I believe the idea was that since he has a portal gun to cross dimensions, he's the only one that could get us to our next destination. Instead, because of his furious public indecency that simply would not stop, We killed him and just took the gun. Then he came back to life with no consequences. I should clarify, for years, Dave had the respawn system from Borderlands, the new U-Station, set up to reinforce that his characters could get away with anything, because they just come back to life and do the same thing until Dave was bored. For years, we tried methods, in and out of game, to explain that he just made death have no consequences in story, and that sucked. And eventually he relented and the system was over. So instead, Rick was just alive for no reason. Minutes later, he threatened to build a bomb to kill every blonde person across reality so that he could get back his portal gun. To do so, he pulled out a second portal gun. I'll excuse attempted home invasion to steal the portal gun back. Technically, we did the crime first. Attempted 3 separate assaults on people randomly. Died and came back 3 separate times. Intruded on a witch circle and acted like his portal gun was magic enough to help, which isn't really a crime but is weird. And stole my jokes from out-of-character chat, the worst crime of all. And through all this, we got more and more tired of Rick and Morty. But it all came to a head when assembling a crew to go into a mental hellscape to rescue Meg from a force of pure entropy that was corrupting her mind. Rick volunteered himself and Morty to go, though no one really wanted them. Morty himself didn't even want to go, but Rick told him to focus on the many rewards that would await them. Fame, fortune, there was neither. And most importantly of all, Morty would apparently get to fuck Meg once he rescued her. Absolute silence flooded the group. Now, when I said that Meg had basically everything go wrong that could go wrong, that included what you might expect from a scientific facility that employs the morally dubious at best. Also important to note, Meg was a minor. So Rick basically said he was going to force 2 minors, one of which was an assault survivor, to bone. And he did this in front of several members of Meg's found family, many of whom were very violent about protecting Meg from stuff like this. Dave tried to avoid consequences by first having Rick try to flee. We were faster. Then, after a few punches landed and Rick was verbally and obviously not sorry, he had Kunoichi-kun the ninja out of nowhere say, "That's enough, Rick is sorry and he's clear of wrongdoing." We obviously disagreed. Then, out of character, he pleaded to stop attacking Rick for this, which ground the session to a halt as we explained how fucked up that was. He still wanted to bring Rick and Morty on the mission, which we almost strongly vetoed, until we remembered. Meg can read minds. She would know what Rick did. So instead we started placing bets on how many seconds it would take to destroy him utterly. Rather than find out, Rick and Morty spontaneously combusted because Dave gave up on them. Believe it or not, that's not the most overt sexual assault Dave was 100% into during my many years of role-playing with him. The stakes for this next story are nowhere near as high as the last. No encroaching end of the world, no war between psychics. In fact, it was part of a basic board game we made and set up to play quick games in between sessions, when other players couldn't make it and we didn't want to run off the plot without them. In this board game, we could control our own characters as player pieces, but also set them up across the board in various spots as appropriate. During one of these, I put on the Goat from Goat Simulator. Yes, I know that the Goat is also of the loud, violent crimes treated for laughs archetype, but I didn't have the Goat try to derail actual serious plot lines, and treated the Goat with the seriousness of the game itself. That is, as a joke. So the Goat is there, buying as goats do. And I don't know if Dave decided that only he could make joke chaos characters or what, because after the game, for no fucking reason, Dave decided to have a photorealistic cow show up and have forced intercourse with the Goat. Absolute silence flooded the group. So we talked about how not okay that was, or at least tried, but Dave's reaction was first, "Okay, I'm bored," and then, "I'm fucking laughing right now," when called out, and he ignored further calling out. And then he decided that joke was so funny, he'd do it again, with no setup, repeatedly, more and more frequently, The entire character of photorealistic Cow, who was barely a character, became a rapist. Usually towards the goat, who was now being dragged into scenes just for the cow to do its thing. Over and over, we tried to get him to stop. And he didn't, for a while. Eventually, I put my foot down and told him outright this was unacceptable. He was screaming and cackling about how hilarious he was about a violent crime with no setup, no punchline, nothing redeeming about it. It was a serious issue, and he was thoroughly out of line, especially considering some of the players were actual assault survivors. His response before the cow was put down for good? Oh, god damn it! As if the worst thing to come out of that was ruining his fun. Because how dare we get in the way of him playing loud, violent criminals who ruin everything they touch and derail everything else. Speaking of which, let's get back to that chili contest. One of Dave's main characters, Lamorak, was a would-be knight with severe anger issues that included a beast form that emerged when he was too angry. And he was very angry at the existence of Haruda once the chili contest ended, seeing it as ruined. He rampaged in beast form over there, causing destruction and threatening to kill Haruda and all she loved. Haruda, of course, was long gone, so this was just attacking innocents. In between all of this, a lot of Dave's characters, mostly canon ones, started up an angry mob, blaming Meg and calling for her death for ruining their chili contest because Haruda existed, I guess. Which, again, was allegedly worse than Red from Dick Figures jacking off in chili that probably dozens of people had tasted at that point. You see, one was an act done by Dave, so therefore it was hilarious, and the other was people who weren't Dave, and thus not important. So with Lamorak rampaging and an angry mob gathering, many members of the town, who happened to be capable fighters and adventurers, sprung into action. Some people tried to stop Lamorak's rampage, others just beat the shit out of the rioters. Dave paid attention to and had actual reactions and consequences from neither, really. It was as if blows didn't land because Lamorak was just too angry to pay attention to when things happened to him. Now you might be thinking that attacking a mob rather than trying to calm them wasn't very heroic, and I know. But this wasn't the first riot that had started, blaming Meg and calling for her to die. Other riots had started for other, equally important reasons. Haruda did something evil as part of her evil plot. It was 10 degrees hotter, unnaturally. Tristan, the hero, died for the third time, for the exact same reason as his first two. Someone put up graffiti in the middle of the last riot. Frogs showed up where there weren't frogs before. I think you get the picture. So, multiple characters had had enough. And among them was one of mine, Red Cloak, also a psychic, though she kept her powers mostly low-key. Subtle manipulations of emotion and focus. She was, however, capable of much more damage, and was irritated enough that she didn't care who when the rioters got hurt, because they had been taught and warned multiple times and completely ignored that. So as Dave was, at last, paying attention to what people were doing to stop the riot, Red Cloak took off the hood that restrained her most devastating powers and projected the hatred of the crowd back on them, psychically inducing them to start tearing each other apart. And so they did. This got even Lamorak to stop and realize what he was doing, and was generally a moment of do not fuck with Red Cloak. But rather than deal with the consequences of that, Dave had aliens show up and abduct a whole bunch of the rioters before flying away so fast no one could deal with them. Not Red, though. He stayed. Because he was so funny when he jacked off. Fuck me for wanting more cool moments for my characters and less sexual assault, I guess. I realize in hindsight that renaming the character Meg to protect their true identity opens them up for a bunch of "shut up, Meg" jokes, but I guarantee you if anyone tried that on the actual character, it would not have been funny. I'm sure that wouldn't have stopped Dave from doing it countless times, though. As before, the question on everyone's minds is probably, why didn't you just leave? And I know, probably should have, but that was my friend group at the time, and leaving a friend group is a lot harder than just saying it in hindsight many years ago. You might also be asking, why didn't you just kick him out? We did, technically, multiple times. You see, the group was a big believer in second chances, and I learned something from hanging out with them over the years. I also learned to believe in second chances. I also learned not to believe in third chances, or fourth chances, or fifth chances, or sixth chances, or seventh chances, or eighth chances, and certainly not in 39th chances. But he kept getting new chances in the hopes he'd get better. But always, he would slide back into something stupid and not apologize for it. And eventually I just got tired of it and cut him out of my life completely. That was years ago. Dave seems to both recognize and not recognize this. Messages I see from people who still talk to him say that he recognizes that I no longer talk to him or want anything to do with him. But he has kept trying to reach out and even network with my colleagues for years, despite knowing I do not like him. See, I would have just left these stories as fun things to share at parties with close friends, knowing that they wouldn't spread all that far and knowing that with hindsight they are exceptionally weird and wacky. But if Dave approaches me on every platform I haven't blocked him on and keeps wanting to get back as though things never happened, well, that just makes me want to reminisce as to the things that actually happened. Speaking of which, I don't know when my next episode will be, but a little preview for you. With all the not safe for work stuff in this episode, you might have thought that Dave's deadly sin was lust, but it absolutely was not. It was wrath. And it leaked everywhere. Hope that's enough of a preview for you. Ta-ta for now, minions!